They say destiny chooses you before you're even born, that the threads of fate are woven so tightly around your life that fighting against them is like trying to stop the ocean with your bare hands. Lyra believed this with every fiber of her being. She had to. When the three Moirai appeared in her village on the night of her 16th birthday, their ancient eyes fixed solely on her, she understood that her life belonged to something greater than herself. The fates don't make mistakes. That's what the elders whispered as they marked her forehead with sacred ash. That's what her mother sobbed as she packed Lyra's belongings into a worn leather satchel. The chosen one, the girl who would restore balance to a dying world. The mortal selected to carry out the will of destiny itself. Lyra walked into the Temple of Threads with her head held high, ready to sacrifice everything for a purpose carved into the stars before time began. The marble halls echoed with prophecies. The golden looms hummed with power. And the three sisters, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, smiled at her with something that looked almost like pity. But destiny is a beautiful lie when you don't know who's really pulling the strings. It started with small inconsistencies. A prophecy that didn't quite match the scrolls. A thread that shimmered the wrong color under moonlight. A whispered conversation. Between the fates that stopped the moment, she entered the room. Lyra ignored these things at first. Doubt was weakness, and the chosen one could afford no weakness. Then she found the locked chamber beneath the temple. The room the fates forbade anyone from entering. The place where the real threads were kept, and where the truth waited like a coiled serpent, ready to strike and poison everything she thought she knew about her glorious purpose. Picture this. You're told your entire life matters, that you're special, that the universe itself has selected you for greatness. Now imagine discovering it was all a carefully constructed trap. That's where our story begins. I'm about to take you on a journey through ancient temples and cosmic deceptions, where destiny isn't what you think it is, and the gods play games with mortal lives like children arranging dolls. This isn't your typical chosen one story. This is what happens when the chosen one starts asking the wrong questions, or maybe the right ones, depending on how you look at it. Lyra's tale is one of betrayal on a divine scale, of power that corrupts even the immortal, and of a young woman who had to choose between comfortable lies and devastating truths. Along the way, you'll meet the fates who aren't quite as impartial as mythology suggests, gods who fear mortal curiosity more than mortal weapons, and allies found in the most unexpected shadows. Before we dive into the depths of this conspiracy that spans millennia, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Are you listening to this in Brazil, scrolling through in the United States, or maybe discovering this story from somewhere I've never even imagined? Your location might be determined by geography, but your imagination has no borders. Let me know where in the world you're joining Lyra's journey. And here's another question to spark your thoughts. If you discovered your entire purpose was a lie, would you have the courage to walk away from it? Would you burn down destiny itself to find your own truth? Keep that question in mind as we begin. Now let the story unfold. The Temple of Threads stood at the edge of the world, where mountains touched clouds and the air tasted like eternity. Lyra had climbed for 3 days to reach it, her feet bleeding through her leather boots, her lungs burning with thin atmosphere. But pain meant nothing to the chosen one. Sacrifice was her inheritance now. The Moirai waited at the entrance, 3 figures draped in robes that seemed woven from starlight and shadow. Clotho, the spinner, held a distaff that glowed with nascent life. Lachesis, the allotter, measured invisible threads with hands that moved too quickly for mortal eyes to follow. And Atropos, the inevitable, carried shears that had cut the thread of every life that ever ended. "You came," Clotho said, her voice like wind through autumn leaves. "I was called," Lyra replied, trying to keep the tremor from her words. "You said the world needs me. The world needs what you will become." Lachesis smiled, and something in that expression made Lyra's stomach tighten. "Come, your training begins immediately." The temple interior defied physics. Hallways stretched longer than the building's exterior should allow. Rooms existed in impossible configurations. And everywhere there were threads. They hung from the ceiling like luminous spider silk, crisscrossed through the air in patterns that hurt to look at directly, and pooled in corners like liquid light. Each thread is a life, Atropos explained as she led Lyra through a corridor lined with golden looms. Every choice, every moment, every breath woven into the great tapestry of existence. We maintain the balance. We ensure the pattern remains intact. And I'm part of this pattern, Lyra asked. You are the thread that will save it from unraveling. Clotho appeared beside her, having moved without seeming to walk. The world is dying, child. The tapestry has been torn. Only the chosen one can repair what has been broken. They brought her to a chamber where a massive loom dominated the space. Unlike the others, this one was dark, its threads tangled and frayed. Some had been cut and left to dangle uselessly. Others knotted together in chaotic masses. This is your task, Lachesis said. To learn our craft, to master the threads, and when you're ready, to weave the great restoration that will heal the damage done by mortal folly and divine negligence. Lyra approached the loom, reaching out tentatively to touch one of the threads. The moment her finger made contact, visions exploded through her mind. A farmer planting seeds, a child laughing, a soldier dying, 1,000 moments compressed into a single heartbeat. She gasped and pulled back. It takes time to adjust, Clotho said gently. But you will learn. You must learn. The fate of everything depends on it. That night, lying on a stone bed in a cell-like room, Lyra should have felt honored, chosen, special. Instead, she felt afraid, though she couldn't say exactly why. What she didn't know was that fear was the first thread of truth, trying to weave itself into her awareness, and the fates were already working to cut it. 3 months passed in the Temple of Threads. Lyra learned to touch the threads without being overwhelmed by the lives they contained. She studied the patterns, memorized the techniques, and slowly began to understand the intricate dance of fate that governed all existence, or so she thought. The Moirai were patient teachers, though strict. Clotho taught her to recognize the shimmer of potential in newly spun threads. Lachesis showed her how to measure and allot the proper length of each life. Atropos demonstrated the clean, necessary cut that ended what must end. Compassion is your enemy here, Atropos warned during one lesson. These are not people to you. They are threads, components of a greater design. Feel too much for one, and you'll destroy the balance of thousands. Lyra nodded, but something in her resisted. When she touched a thread and saw a mother holding her newborn for the first time, how could she see just a thread? When she felt the joy of an old couple celebrating 50 years together, how could she remain detached? But she tried. She had to try. The world was counting on her. It was on a night when the moon hung full and heavy that Lyra's curiosity led her astray. She'd been returning to her chamber after a particularly exhausting session at the looms when she noticed something odd. A door she'd never seen before, set into a wall she passed every day. It was small, almost hidden in shadow, and marked with symbols that seemed to writhe and change when she looked at them directly. Her training screamed at her to keep walking. The fates had been clear. There were parts of the temple forbidden to her until she completed her instruction. But her hand, acting on some impulse she didn't fully understand, reached for the handle. It opened. Beyond lay a descending staircase carved from black stone. No light illuminated it, yet somehow Lyra could see each step clearly. The air rising from below felt different, older, like the breath of something that had been sleeping for eons. She descended. The stairs went down much farther than should be possible, down past the temple's foundation, past the mountain itself, into depths that existed, in some space between the physical world and something else entirely. At the bottom she found another chamber. This one was vast, so large she couldn't see its far walls, and it was filled with looms, hundreds of them, thousands each, one attended by translucent figures that looked like echoes of the Moirai, spinning and weaving and cutting with mechanical precision. But it was the threads themselves that made Lyra's breath catch. They were wrong, twisted. Some pulsed with a sickly grey light. Others seemed to scream silently as they were woven. And in the center of it all stood a loom larger than any other, working on a tapestry that depicted a world that looked like hers but fundamentally wasn't. You weren't supposed to find this. Not yet, Lyra spun. Clotho stood on the stairs behind her, but the kindness had vanished from her ancient face. What truth had Lyra stumbled upon, and could she escape to tell it? Clotho descended the remaining steps with movements that seemed less like walking and more like reality, rearranging itself around her. The warm teacher who had guided Lyra's hands over the looms was gone. What remained was something far older, far stranger and infinitely more dangerous. "I should have known," Clotho said quietly. "You were always too curious, too questioning. That's what made you perfect for this, but also what makes you a risk." "What is this place?" Lyra demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Those threads, they're suffering. I can feel it. Suffering is relative. Pain is temporary. The pattern is eternal." Clotho gestured to the vast chamber. "This is the true temple of threads. What we showed you above is merely a classroom, a simplified version for mortal comprehension." "You're lying." "Am I?" Clotho's laugh was like breaking glass. "Tell me, child, what did you think happened to all the threads that didn't fit the pattern? Did you believe we simply let chaos have its way? That we allowed free will to destroy the careful balance we've maintained since the dawn of creation?" Lyra's mind raced. The threads she'd worked with above were clean, pure, easy to manipulate. But these twisted, agonized threads spoke of something fundamentally wrong. "The Great Restoration," Lyra whispered. "It's not about fixing damage, is it? It's about control. Finally, you begin to understand." Lachesis appeared from between two looms, followed by Atropos. The three sisters formed a triangle around Lyra. "The world doesn't need saving from destruction. It needs saving from itself, from the chaos of choice, from the cancer of free will." Atropos ran her thumb along the edge of her shears. "Every deviation from our design creates ripples. A peasant who chooses to become a scholar disrupts the economy of his village. A soldier who refuses to fight alters the outcome of wars. A child who asks too many questions grows into an adult who challenges the order of things. So you force them back into line," Lyra said, horror dawning. "These tortured threads, they're people who tried to choose their own paths. We guide them back to their proper place in the pattern," Clotho corrected. "And when guidance fails, we trim the threads that would unravel everything. It's not cruelty, it's necessity." Lyra backed away, her shoulders hitting a loom. A thread caught on her sleeve and she felt it. A woman fighting against an arranged marriage. Her will being slowly crushed, reshaped, forced into compliance. The thread pulsed with resistance and pain. "You're not fates," Lyra said. "You're tyrants. We are what we must be." Lachesis moved closer. "And you, dear child, are the key to our greatest work. The Great Restoration isn't about repairing the tapestry. It's about reweaving it entirely. A new world where threads cannot deviate, where choice is an illusion so perfect that mortals will never even realize they're bound. And you need me because it requires a mortal thread to anchor the change," Atropos answered. "A willing sacrifice, a chosen one who accepts her destiny and allows herself to be woven into the very foundation of the new design. You'll become part of every thread, ensuring eternal compliance. Eternal order. Eternal peace. That's not peace. That's prison." Clotho's expression almost looked sympathetic. "You'll understand once it's done. Once you're transformed, your consciousness will expand to encompass the pattern itself. You'll see why this is necessary. Why free will is humanity's curse, not its gift. And if I refuse..." The three Moirai exchanged glances. Then Atropos raised her shears, and Lyra saw her own thread reflected in the blades, shimmering and vulnerable. "Then we'll find another chosen one," Atropos said simply. "We've done it before." The chamber suddenly felt very cold, and Lyra realized she was standing in a room with the corpses of her predecessors. Hopes, all the other chosen ones who had perhaps discovered the truth too soon. Could she escape a fate written by the fates themselves? Lyra's mind calculated possibilities at desperate speed. 3 immortal beings who controlled the threads of existence itself surrounded her in a chamber that existed outside normal space. Her mortal body, her untrained power, her complete lack of weapons, all of it screamed that escape was impossible, which is exactly what they expected her to think. "I need time to consider," Lyra said, forcing her voice to steady. "This is everything I've worked for, everything I believed about my purpose. You're asking me to accept that it was all a beautiful lie wrapped around a horrifying truth." Clotho tilted her head, studying Lyra with eyes that had witnessed the birth of stars. "You're stalling." "I'm thinking," Lyra countered. "Isn't that what you fear most? Mortals who think." Lachesis laughed. "She has spirit. I'll grant her that." "Very well, child. Think, consider, wrestle with your conscience, in whatever time you believe you have. But understand this, you cannot leave the temple. The moment you set foot outside these walls without accepting your role, your thread will be cut. Not even we can prevent that. The pattern has already woven your destiny too tightly." "Then I'll stay and think," Lyra said. The Moirai allowed her to return to her chamber, though she noticed that the small door to the hidden staircase had vanished, sealed, as if it had never existed. But the knowledge remained, burning in her mind like swallowed fire. She lay on her stone bed and touched the, stone, solid, real, but she'd learned enough about threads to know that reality was more flexible than most people understood. Every choice created branches. Every decision wove new possibilities. And she'd spent 3 months learning to manipulate threads. At midnight, when the temple grew quiet, and even the eternal looms seemed to slow their rhythm, Lyra sat up and closed her eyes. She reached not outward but inward, searching for something she'd felt but never fully acknowledged. Her own thread, the line of her existence running from birth toward whatever ending awaited there, a golden shimmer in her mind's eye. Her life, her choices, her moments all strung together in a continuous line. And she could see where the Moirai had touched it. Subtle manipulations, gentle tugs toward the temple, manufactured coincidences that led her to this place. But she could also see something they hadn't counted on. The very training they'd given her had taught her to touch threads, to understand them, to manipulate them. They'd assumed she'd only use these skills on others. They never considered she might use them on herself. Carefully, slowly, she reached for her own thread and pulled. The pain was immediate and absolute. Every nerve screamed. Reality warped around her. But she held on, redirecting, reweaving, creating a branch in her destiny where none should exist. Not a new thread that would alert the Moirai instantly. Just a tiny deviation, a possibility where she was still in her chamber sleeping, while her actual consciousness moved elsewhere. It worked for 17 seconds before Atropos appeared in her room. Shears already raised. "Clever," the Ancient One said, "and foolish. Did you really think we wouldn't notice?" But Lyra was already rolling, her split consciousness confusing her physical location for just long enough. She touched the wall and pushed her will into it, remembering how the temple's architecture defied normal physics. If it could create impossible spaces, perhaps it could create impossible exits. The stone rippled, an opening formed, and Lyra threw herself through it before Atropos's shears could close. She tumbled through darkness, through spaces between spaces, falling through the gaps in reality that the temple existed within. She fell for hours or seconds, time meaning nothing in this nowhere place, until finally she crashed onto hard ground under an open sky. She was outside. Somehow, impossibly, she'd escaped the Temple of Threads. But when she looked back, the temple was gone. Only mountain peaks remained, and a sunrise that painted them gold. What she didn't know yet was that escape was only the first impossibility she'd need to accomplish, and that the Moirai were already reweaving the world itself to hunt her. Lyra's legs couldn't hold her. She collapsed on the rocky ground, her body shaking from the effort of what she'd done. Manipulating her own thread had felt like tearing herself apart and stitching the pieces back together in a different configuration. Every cell hurt. Every breath was work. But she was free. Or was she? She stood on shaking legs and looked around. The mountains were familiar, the same range she'd climbed months ago to reach the temple. But something felt wrong. The light was too bright, the air tasted different, and in the distance, where her village should have been nestled in the valley, there was nothing. Just empty land, as if thousands of people had never existed at all. "No," she whispered, stumbling forward. "No, no, no." She ran down the mountain path, ignoring her screaming muscles and bleeding feet. The descent that had taken days now took hours, driven by desperate fear, and when she finally reached the valley floor, her worst suspicions were confirmed. The village was gone. Not destroyed, not burned, simply absent, as if it had been erased from existence. The river still flowed, the trees still grew, but every house, every street, every trace of human habitation had vanished. Lachesis's words echoed in her memory. "Your thread will be cut. The pattern has already woven your destiny too tightly." They hadn't cut her thread. They'd done something worse. They'd removed everything connected to it. Her village, her mother, everyone she'd ever known. The Moirai had unraveled them from existence itself as punishment for her defiance. Lyra fell to her knees in the middle of where the village square should have been and screamed. Not quite accurate, but close enough. She spun. An old woman sat on a rock that definitely hadn't been there moments before. She wore simple traveling clothes and carried a walking stick, carved with symbols that hurt to look at. But her eyes were young and sharp and filled with something that looked like recognition. "Who are you?" Lyra demanded. "Someone who's been waiting a very long time for a chosen one brave enough to reject her choosing," the woman smiled. "My name is Thalia, and before you ask, no, I'm not a fate. I'm something they tried very hard to erase from the pattern. I'm a mistake, a thread that refused to be cut, a deviation they couldn't correct, a reminder that their control isn't as absolute as they'd like to. Believe." Thalia stood, leaning on her stick. "Your village isn't gone, child. It's been rewoven into a version of reality where you were never born. The Moirai are showing you what they can do, what they will do to everyone who ever knew you if you continue to resist." "Then I've already lost," Lyra said bitterly. "I can't fight them. They control everything. They control the threads they know about." Thalia's smile widened. "But what if I told you there are threads they never learned to see? Patterns within patterns, a deeper weave that existed before the Moirai claimed dominion over fate itself." Hope stirred in Lyra's chest. "Fragile and dangerous. You're saying there's a way to fight them. I'm saying there's a way to break their loom entirely, to shatter the mechanism they use to enforce their tyranny and return true choice to the world." Thalia extended her hand. "But it requires going deeper than the temple, deeper than the mountain, all the way down to the first thread, the original pattern from which all others spring. And if you think what you've endured so far was difficult, child, you haven't seen anything yet." Lyra looked at the empty valley, at the absence of everything she'd loved. Then she looked at Thalia's weathered hand, scarred from battles Lyra could only imagine. The Moirai expected her to surrender, to accept the restoration and become their eternal enforcer. They thought mortality was weakness, that grief and loss would break her. They were wrong. Lyra took Thalia's hand. "Show me," she said. "Show me how to burn their destiny to the ground, and somewhere in the Temple of Threads." Atropos felt a shiver run through the pattern itself, a disturbance that shouldn't be possible. And for the first time in eons, the inevitable one felt something she'd forgotten existed: uncertainty. Thalia led Lyra away from the empty valley, moving with the steady pace of someone who'd walked impossible distances. They traveled for 3 days through landscapes that seemed to shift and blur at the edges, as if reality itself was uncertain about where they were going. "The Moirai built their power on a lie," Thalia explained as they walked. "They tell mortals that fate is absolute, that destiny is woven before birth and cannot be changed. But that's backwards. Fate doesn't create choice. Choice creates fate. Every decision spins a new thread. Every action weaves a new pattern. The Moirai don't govern destiny. They've just convinced everyone that they do. Then how do they have so much power? Lyra asked. Belief, Thalia pointed, to the sky where stars were beginning to emerge in the twilight. Enough people believe in their authority, and that belief becomes a kind of truth. It grants them power over the pattern, but it's borrowed power, stolen power, and it can be taken back. They stopped at the base of a cliff face that stretched up into clouds. Carved into the stone was a door, ancient beyond measure, covered in symbols that predated language itself. Beyond this lies the underweave, Thalia said. The original pattern, when the world was young and the first conscious beings began making choices. Those choices created threads, not life threads like the Moirai spin, but possibility threads, potential. Before the Moirai claimed control, before they convinced the cosmos to give them authority, the pattern was wild and free and beautiful and dangerous, Lyra guessed. Chaos always is, but chaos is also where creation happens, where change becomes possible. Thalia placed her palm against the door. The Moirai sealed this place millennia ago. They've spent eons trying to make everyone forget it exists. But you can't destroy possibility. You can only bury it. The door opened to Thalia's touch, revealing a passage that descended into darkness. What's down there? Lyra asked. The truth about the Moirai, about where they came from, and the weapon we'll need to end them. Thalia's expression grew grave. But I need to warn you. Once you see what's down there, once you touch the underweave, the Moirai will know exactly where you are. They'll throw everything they have at stopping you. Every thread they control will become a weapon aimed at your destruction. Lyra thought of her erased village, her vanished mother, all the lives the Moirai had, twisted and controlled and crushed beneath their vision of order. Good, she said. Let them come. They descended together into the dark. The passage went down for what felt like days, though time behaved strangely in this place. Sometimes Lyra felt like she was climbing instead of descending. Sometimes she was certain they were moving sideways. But always, Thalia's presence beside her remained constant, until they reached the bottom. The underweave chamber was nothing like the temple's hidden room. Where that had been orderly and mechanical, this was alive. Threads didn't just hang here. They danced, they sang. They twisted and merged and split in patterns that followed no rules except their own wild logic. And the colors, the impossible colors that had no names, shifted and changed with each passing moment. Beautiful, isn't it? Thalia whispered. This is what the pattern looks like, when no one's controlling it. But Lyra had noticed something else. In the center of the chamber, bound in chains made of what looked like frozen threads, was a figure, massive, humanoid but not quite human, and sleeping. Who is that? She asked. Thalia's expression turned sad. That child is who the Moirai really are, or rather who they were before they split themselves into three. What? The Moirai weren't always three sisters. Once they were a single being, the original weaver, the first entity to recognize the pattern and try to understand it. But understanding became obsession. Obsession became the need to control. And when the weaver realized that one consciousness couldn't hold enough threads to control everything, it split itself into three: Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, each holding one aspect of the original power. Lyra stared at the sleeping giant. Then this is what remains, the core self they abandoned, the part of them that still remembered what it was like to wonder, instead of command. They chained it here and tried to forget it existed. And we're going to wake it up, Lyra guessed. We're going to offer it a choice, Thalia corrected. Revenge against the three who abandoned it, or redemption by helping us undo what they've done. Either way, the Moirai's greatest secret becomes their greatest weakness. Lyra approached the sleeping figure. Up close, she could see its face, and she understood something that made her gasp. The features shifted constantly, showing traces of Clotho's wisdom, Lachesis's precision, and Atropos's inevitability. But underneath it all was something else, something almost kind. She reached out and touched the chains. The underweave exploded with light, and above them, in the temple of threads, The three Moirai screamed in unified terror as they felt the touch of the self they'd murdered so very long ago. The final thread was pulling taut, and someone was about to cut it forever.